So what made you decide to bring Virtua Fighter 5 to the Xbox 360?
After the experience of making the PS3 version, the team really wanted the chance to try making a game for the 360 as well. We wanted to give VF5 a broad availability on next-gen consoles. We really begged the company to let us go ahead with it.
Virtua Fighter in the US was probably most popular on the PS2. I think it's probably sold the most copies on PS2 that I've ever had. Do you think that the 360 might expand the audience even further in the US?
I've heard that the 360 is doing really well in the States, and I have pretty much total confidence in the quality of this version. So I'm sure it will surpass the popularity of the PS2 release. At least I hope it does.
The Xbox systems are known for the Dead or Alive series. How do you think that Virtua Fighter stacks up to Dead or Alive?
We're definitely aware that Dead or Alive is the biggest fighting game on the Xbox, and I think it does what it sets out to do very well. In the end, though, there are two very different types of fighter. For example, Dead or Alive is really driven by its characters. I don't think it's the kind of situation where one game needs to win and the other lose. Both games should be able to stake out their own space in the fighting genre on the 360. I guess I feel that they don't really overlap that much.
Can you talk about the philosophy behind the series?
Mr. Kataoka often refers to Virtua Fighter as a kind of sport. If I had to express the game's philosophy in a word, I'd have to say game balance. This has been something we've always prided ourselves on, and I don't expect it to change.
The biggest improvement to VF5, probably over VF4, was BFTV in the arcade. It, was really impressive. But a lot of that couldn't make it to the home version. Are you happy with the way that you're able to implement VFT in the home TV in the home version, or would you wish you could do a little bit more?
Well, from the start we knew the two versions of VFTV would have different aims. In the arcades, it serves as a way to show people passing by what's going on, like an advertisement or an on-the-street TV. We didn't think it would have the same effect if we brought it to the home console without any changes. And while their aims are different, there are certain things we weren't able to implement fully on the 360 version, such as ranking due to networking issues. We're trying to include as many of its original functions as possible, though, such as viewing live matches.
Both the type of environment and the intended use of VFTV in the home differ greatly from the original, so it's hard to know how effective they will be.
There used to be lots and lots of fighting games, but now there's really just Virtua Fighter, Tekken, Soul Calibur, and Dead or Alive. Why do you think that the rest of them don't exist anymore?
Survival of the fittest. Each of those series has its own defining characteristics. They survived by being able to clearly grasp what users will accept and what they want in a fighter, and then to implement these things in each release. In the case of Virtua Fighter, we've always sought to perfect the sense of game balance, which in turn raises the quality of the product as a whole. Other games have emphasized the characters, the story, or sheer entertainment value. It's also important for developers to be honest with themselves about what has worked and what hasn't in the past, and then to carry those things into the next game in the series.
How come Americans can't make a good fighting game?
Actually, I think there are a number of good American-made fighters.
How about Fight Night?
I'm a fan of Mortal Kombat and the Def Jam fighting series personally. I feel these aren't games Japanese developers are capable of making. I'd rather see games like this come from America than something that just tried to imitate the style of Japanese fighting games.
When James Milkey was here to talk about the PS3 conversion of the game, at that time in the interview it said that the PS3 hardware was closer to Lindbergh than the 360 is. Can you talk about how this has affected the development of the 360 version of the game?
Well, I might not be the best person to ask as the programmers do all the real nitty-gritty work, but it took us about the same amount of time to produce both versions. I'd say they were both about equally challenging to develop.
In some ways, I think developing for the 360 was easier. Microsoft's software development kits, for example, were very well put together, and they were also very helpful in responding to our requests and in supporting the team. From a developer perspective, that made things a lot easier. The development tools they provided were also a big help in measuring game performance as we went along.
Now, as you know, the arcade market in the U.S. is completely dead. Has you ever given any thought to including more features in the home versions, or is the focus of the development still primarily the arcade versions?
From the beginning of our goal in bringing Virtua Fighter to the home consoles was not to make a new game with a lot of original features, but rather to make the arcade version playable at home. In the case of Soul Calibur, with 3 they did the reverse, releasing it for the consoles first and the arcades later. As a result, the 2 versions are very different games. Our stance has been to first bring the arcade experience to the home, and then within that framework make certain changes or additions.
Virtua Fighter is really an arcade game in the truest sense. By that I mean the type of game that is designed specifically for the arcade scene to be enjoyed by a bunch of people at once. The challenge for us has always been how to best transfer that to the home gaming experience. One of Sega's hallmarks as a company has been to first produce the highest quality arcade games possible, and then to bring those games to home machines where they can be enjoyed by everyone. I think Virtua Fighter is one example of this, and so it remains first and foremost an arcade game.
I often think that things would be perfect if only Virtua Fighter could become popular in American arcades.
The quest mode on Virtua Fighter 5, and I'm speaking more about the PlayStation 3 version here, was very similar to the Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution quest mode. Didn't really change much. I was wondering if you thought that the quest mode was sort of have you perfected it, or do you see that there's new places you could take it or ways to improve it?
We did come up with a number of ideas for changing the quest mode, but when we considered things like the time these would take, we decided it was best to stick with the same basic format.
I've always been interested in the idea of an in-game virtual shop. This time we decided to focus on making the quest mode more enjoyable, mainly by way of graphic improvements. There are a number of directions we're thinking of taking it in the future though, and I think you'll see it get updated next time around.
But can you talk a little bit about the 2 new characters that have been added to the game, Eileen and L-Blaze, kind of where the idea for those characters came from?
The arcade team had a desire to utilize elements such as the offensive move that would emphasize the 3-dimensionality of the fighting in the new system. For the same reasons, they also wanted to add a couple of tricky characters that were fun to play and had appealing moves. They ended up going with Lucha Libre and Monkey-style Kung Fu, as both fighting styles are somewhat comical and flashy.